setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. Et voila. All right. Hello, friends. So we are going to do the very multi-step tech side of things of double checking that this is coming through. And things of double checking, and it is coming through. So hello. Thank you all so much for joining Group Tarot's YouTube Live. We go live every 10th of the month at 11 a.m. Pacific, chatting with different tarot deck creators and authors. And today, y'all are getting the very rustic road trip version of a live. I am not going live with Conscience the Traveling Moth, my sparkly purple bus, but I am zooming in here from Eastern Oregon, Walla Walla, and Confederated Tribes of the Silex land, and I'm sure many other tribes that Umatilla is out here that I am not remembering in this moment. I had hoped to be zooming in with our incredibly special guest, Enfys book, author of Queer Qabala, from the Maxwell Heritage Center, but it just so happens that they have a huge benefit going on tonight, and they don't have enough staffing to deal with a huge benefit and have the Heritage Center open at the same time. So if any of y'all happen to be in Eastern Oregon, feel free to go to their benefit tonight or toss them some money, because it's really important, especially in Oregon, that was founded as a whites-only state, to have the vibrant Black history that does exist, even in these little small towns in Eastern Oregon, out there and supported. So, Enfys, I am so excited to chat with you about your book, Queer Qabala. Some folk watching might be like, but how does the Kabbalah tie into tarot at all? And I have a feeling that between you and I, we'll be able to expound. That's not the right word.
Expound.
Expound. Thank you on that a bit more. Oh, and we met at Convocation last year and have stayed in touch. Convocation is one of the largest pagan gatherings and currently the oldest pagan convention in the United States, Turtle Island. And I have been loving reading and working through this. And yeah, so what made you want to write a book on Kabbalah from a queer perspective?
Mainly because one didn't exist yet and I wanted it to exist. And it's something I'd been doing a lot of work with as a queer person. And as I was working and learning the system, I was like, wait, this is super inherently queer, but I don't see any of the books I'm reading talking about that. Like, you don't have to paint a rainbow over the tree of life to make it queer. It just already is in so many ways. So I was like, why is this not coming up? Like, it was sort of briefly touched on in Rachel Pollack's book, The Tree of Life. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. And I started kind of pulling on that thread more, like there's more here than is in this book. And I wanted to keep pulling. And so then it became a blog post series and then it became a book. So it was kind of a fun little evolution for that. And I'm lucky in that the books I have worked on so far in my career are books that do not already exist in any capacity. And I really just wanted them to exist. So I
Mhm.
made that happen.
I love that. And it's interesting because I came out in the 90s. And at that point, we didn't have language like non-binary and ace and things like that. And so the middle pillar was just the middle pillar. And one of the
Hmm.
things that I absolutely loved was like, if you have the masculine and feminine pillar, then of course the center, of course the middle pillar is going to be the non-binary pillar. But like we didn't have that language then. And when so many of the earlier books on Kabbalah were written, like we just didn't have that language. And so all of the ways that you point out, I especially appreciated all of the how there can be similar and different names for the Sephiroth and that have masculine, that like feminine endings on the masculine side and vice versa. Like all of that complexity was already there, even though our ancestors were using different language about it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that is a lot of what was fun to write about this book is just kind of pointing out those pieces and the bit on the Hebrew names having masculine and feminine energies. That's the part that was from Rachel Pollack's book that I sort of was like, oh, like here we go. Now I'm starting to think through this in a different way. And it really came at an interesting time in my own spiritual growth and personal growth as a queer person, because I came out as bi to myself in the late 90s,
Mhm.
to others over the course of the next 10-ish years, kind of here and there. And I didn't figure out that I was non-binary until I was in my late 30s, in like the late 2010s.
Mhm.
Because again, as you say, we didn't really have language for that. It wasn't
Yeah,
really something talked about. If I had had that language as a teenager, I think I would have been like, yes, that is me.
that's
That makes
me.
sense.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, there's so much about the Tree of Life that's just this interesting mishmash of playing with gender concepts that I feel is so goes so underappreciated. And I really wanted to bring that out in the book and say, look, like I'm not doing anything to this. I'm just pointing out what's already there. And if
Mhm.
you pay attention, it's an incredibly queer inclusive tool, starting with, as you say, that middle pillar. It already has this concept of, okay, we're going to call this either the masculine pillar or the pillar of mercy. We're going to call this the feminine pillar, the pillar of severity, or what. There's several different names for each. But this middle pillar has always just been kind of like the middle pillar or the pillar of balance or whatever. But it already says there's more than masculinity and femininity. There's more than these two so-called opposites at play in the universe, in how everything is created and manifested. There's so much more. We can transcend this concept of a binary, and there's threes all throughout the tree. There's three triangles, there's three pillars, there's three Sephiroth on each of the side pillars. Like three, three, three just keeps coming up, and that's more than two. Two is a binary, three is more. So it's one of those things I just love about it as a spiritual tool.
Mhm. 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 How do you, as this is a channel where we primarily talk about tarot and divinatory themes, both from personal and business perspectives, although more personal and spiritual. Um, how do you use tarot as a tool yourself at all, or do you use other forms of divination?
Yeah, tarot is definitely my main axe for divination. I have tried many different systems and occasionally dabble in a couple of them, but tarot for me, more than even oracle decks, I think tarot specifically is an incredibly valuable tool. And I'm going to pull from something I learned from one of my mentors, Ivo Dominguez Jr., who was heavily influential in the book that came out. But he says that Hermetic Qabala or Kabbalah, depending on how you pronounce it, is the operating system for all modern tarot decks. So,
Mm,
gaining an understanding and appreciation of the tree of life and how it's structured and all the different components can only enhance your understanding and depth of experience with tarot. Now, I will say I'm much more of a Kabbalist than a tarot expert, but I definitely use it deeply in my readings. It hooks very closely into when I'm trying to interpret a card. I will often click into, okay, what's the Kabbalah lens on this?
mm,
Especially
mhm.
if I'm staring at a card and having that moment of, what are you trying to tell me? Because sometimes we hit that point of just like, okay, and then there's this card that's doing something and it doesn't make sense to me immediately. So I'm going to sit and think about it a minute. And that's just one of those lenses, sort of like I'm doing this like you're at the eye doctor and they throw the lens in front and then they have the different lens. So yeah.
And you
So
get
yeah,
that little blink in the eye sort of itches and waters a little bit depending on the focus.
yeah, and how it maps to Kabbalah is the major arcana. There are 22 major arcana. There are 22 paths between all the spheres on the tree of life. Each one of those major arcana is one of those paths. And the
Mhm.
paths are the subjective experience of moving between these two more objective states of the paths. So being able to think about, okay, this is the card that lies between these two. What is the experience of going from this to this? And
Mhm.
what does that feel like? And if you're looking at the minor arcana, well, there's 10 suits or 10, sorry, 10 numbers. And
Numbers,
then we
of
have
course.
10 spheres on the tree of life. There's also 4 worlds and there's 4 suits. And there's all these different layers of interpretation that you can add on. The 4 worlds apply to the court
Forecast.
cards and everything else. So that's the really quick and dirty version of how it maps on there. But it's another great layer of interpretation for those things. And it's funny because the very first tarot deck I ever owned, I
Hmm.
picked up at the Delmarva Pagan Pride Festival in, I want to say it was 2013.
Yeah.
Um, and it was from, oh gosh, why am I blanking on her name? Ellen Cannon Reed's Witch's Tarot,
Mhm.
which has Kabbalah worked into the cards so that every
Mm.
major arcana has in the corners, in the design, the spheres, the colors of the spheres that it lies between, which
Yes.
at the time I didn't have full appreciation of. But over time, I was like, oh, this is great. I love this. So it's funny
Mhm.
that that was the first tarot deck I picked up, and I fell in love with tarot before I fell in love with Kabbalah. So it's kind of funny that one led me to the other kind of indirectly. Yeah.
And then as soon as you got there, you were like, hey, wait, this actually does tie back to what I was doing here.
Hmm.
Hmm,
Hmm.
hmm. Love how those circles just and spirals just
Hmm.
continue going around. Now, I haven't made it all the way through your book, in part because I am reading it through with a group, the rebels and priestesses. So there is a cohort of us, and because some of them may be watching, hello, and for any others watching and tuning in live, if you have questions about Kabbalah, about tarot, about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, feel free to toss them in the chat, and Enfys and I will absolutely weave those in. And if you are not watching the YouTube, which Enfys, which is totally fine, I am monitoring the chat. Um,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, totally. And so
I love how many post-it notes are in there. That just warms my heart to see it. There's a great story of Terry Pratchett who's like, any given signing, somebody is book signing I do, someone's going to bring in a copy of Good Omens that has been absolutely battered, dropped in the bath, dropped in soup, but it is much loved and it's the fourth copy they've had kind of thing. And that's I feel and shows that the book is very loved. And that's what I always love is seeing someone with a copy that's like dog-eared and has like post-its and all of that. Yeah, just warms my
I
heart.
I am the daughter of a librarian and an English professor. And in
Oh,
fact, we are having this chat outside of the, I want to say the Joseph Public Library, but that's the county I'm currently in. This is the challenge with pass throughs, friends. I believe the town name that I am in right now is Enterprise. Um, regardless, I am outside of their public library. And so being the daughter of a librarian, was uh I do not dog ear my book, but I will absolutely
Sticky
post
note to
note
heck.
them.
Hmm.
I will make notes, all of those things. And so the Rebels and Priestesses is a theatrical cohort that I am a part of, bringing Mary K. Greer's Women of the Golden Dawn, Rebels and
Mm.
Priestesses into a performance piece. And we've had a few different workshops. And after the most recent one, because of how the Golden Dawn structured their initiation system in tandem but in opposite of the Tree of Life, that was all a part of the performance piece. And one of the
Mhm.
biggest chunks of feedback we all had was that it was either unclear or incorrect because, of course, the initiation starts at Malkut and makes its way up to
Mhm.
Keter, but of course Keter is the first Sephiroth going down to 10,
Right.
which is Malkut, and that shift was not clearly communicated in the workshop.
Ah.
And so all of us in the cohort are queer. Shireen and I both met you and both bought your book at Convocation,
Yay.
the months before this particular workshop showing. And so in hearing all of that feedback, we were like, well, I think we have a book that's going to help us clear this up. And and I was like, Shireen, do you agree with this, or am I way off? Am I way off? And she was like, yeah, nope, nope. And so we're reading it as a cohort together.
I
And
love that. Thank you.
yeah, it's delightful. And ooh, and we have, oh, this is lovely. So we have a question from Matthew for you. Would you
Hi,
speak
Matthew.
Hello. Would you speak more about your experience of moving through the spheres, the Sephiroth, in your personal journey to then writing Queer Qabala?
Oh, it's complicated, but I will sum it up so we're not here for 3 hours. So the real, and a lot of it's very personal too. So like there's a certain amount that's like, that's just for me.
Yeah,
But
totally.
so my experience working with, I started by reading Ellen Cannon Reed's book, The Witch's Kabbalah, in 2013. And that was kind of my foundation starting point. And I got weirdly hooked on the concept like really early on. It just really grabbed me for a number of different reasons, some of which I talk about in the book. But the thing that really propelled me toward writing the book was not only just intense and hyper-focused study for several years, but for my second degree work for my tradition, the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, they have you create something that can benefit the whole tradition. And for me, my high priestess sort of voluntold me what I was going to be doing, which was, she said, so we're doing this big climbing the tree ritual next year. And I had done it previously with my tradition. It's an incredible, like you have an individual ritual experience at each of the 10 spheres. And it is mind blowing. Like I still have in my brain stuff that I learned from the first time I did that in 2014, 2015, something like that. They do it every 3, 4 years. And so my high priestess is like, I want us to have more grounding in this system. I would like you to do all of our rituals next year and also do classes to introduce us to all of the spheres. So I went, okay. So of course that began a continued intense study. And as I was experiencing this, I was also doing a small group study working through the Shining Paths by Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki, which is a series of path workings moving through those paths up the Tree of Life. And so that was part of it. And then I'm writing these classes, and I also interwove it with tarot because what I wanted my focus to be was how do tarot and the Tree of Life work together? I want to deepen my understanding of that. So over the course of that year, I wrote all of these rituals and did all these things, and I've open sourced all of that on Google Drive for anyone who wants those rituals, anyone who wants to read my notes. I created a poster in my room, my bedroom, that was like, this is a giant version of the tree, and as I'm having experiences, I'm putting sticky notes on the different places where I'm having these experiences.
Do you have different colored sticky notes to color correspond with the different Sephirot?
I do not, because I was mainly working the paths. So, and also I was, yeah, just like, let me get, and I couldn't write tiny enough. So I had to like stick them to a piece of paper and run them through my printer and like do that kind of thing. But I still have that poster. I've moved, so I don't still have it on the wall, but all of those little kind of short summaries of my experiences were, it was really helpful to have it like visually in front of me. And it was during that course of study that I started poking at the, wait, this is really queer. And about the same time when I started to be like, I'm non-binary, what does that mean? And what does
Hmm.
that mean for my spirituality? What does that mean for my soul? What does that mean for my gender expression? Which, boy, just if you want to break my brain, just ask, what is your gender expression, Enfys? And I'll be like, I
Yeah,
don't know. My wannabe expression is just, I'd like, gender is exhausting. I just want to be a cloud. But
I love
but you
that.
know, so it's basically ends up sort of splitting the difference in what my friend calls sloth femme. But anyway, a lot of yoga pants up in this. Um, but yeah, I think that sort of gets at the question. Like I started studying it pretty early on, then I got deeper and deeper while trying to write these rituals, and then ultimately it became a website and blog series, and then it became a book.
I love that. And Matthew clarified that it is Megan signed in as Matthew, and
Oh,
I actually no, this is one of the rebels and
oh
priestesses.
yay.
So
Hi, Megan.
hello,
I'm so
Megan.
happy you're studying the book. Thank you for the question.
Um, I find it fascinating that you and I also have a similar ritual parallel. When
Mm.
my first introduction to Kabbalah was a tree of life ritual as well, that was done by Moonbeat's Earthsong Sanctuary, and it was my only my second or third ritual with them when they were still around and I was still in Chicago. And the high priest there at the time asked me if I would be the embodiment of Netzach for
Mm.
that ritual. And hearing you say that there are still some things from those early path workings that are just like instant recall, like right back there. I still remember some of what I said and the greens that I was wearing in that um in that ritual. And it's amazing how those things can just seep into our souls.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. When we did the ritual in, I want to say it was 2018, 2019, I got to embody Hesed, and I had such a blast. And it's weirdly, it sort of dovetailed into me becoming leadership in my coven, which was sort of a perfect sort of meeting of different energies that sort of support each other. So
mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love that ritual so much. Pardon me. I think we are doing it again. I want to say next year or the year after. And yeah, I'm gonna be there. I'm just be like, yep, I'm doing
Yep.
this ritual again. I love it. It's so, so powerful.
Mm,
And to me too, the tree of life, you have to experience it. Like there's a lot that can be imparted through books, but there's more that can be imparted when you have a personal experience, which is why my book has so many path workings in it. And they
mhm.
wouldn't let me put this in the book for reasons I still don't fully understand, but I have audio recorded all of those path workings and they're on my website if anyone wants to just listen and follow along. They're on majorarqueerna.com, ARQUEERNA.
And I can say that they are fantastic
Oh, thank
because
you.
I signed up for your mailing list. And that
Yay.
is that when you sign up for their mailing list as well, you too will get those, or apparently also for free if you don't want the mailing list, but I mean,
I think there's
honestly,
a bonus 11th one you only get if you sign up for the mailing list. But
ooh,
the
delightful.
others, the other 10 are on Spotify and SoundCloud and a couple other places if you just want to get those. But yes, they're not downloadable unless you get the mailing list. So if you want to keep them for all time, and if you want that bonus 11th one, you can sign up for the mailing list.
And they are lovely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I we in our Rebels and Priestesses group, we listened to the first one the other day, and yeah, it's as somebody who frequently leads guided meditations, it's nice to be led through instead. Um, and so part of why I had brought up that I haven't finished this is I'm not sure if you, because in other books that I have all of the major arcana correspondences for each of the pathways on the tree. And so what I don't know yet is, did you revise what those traditional pathways are in this book, or did you stay true to, what you would find if you went into one of the other glorious resources out there, which are spacing from my tongue right
So
now?
I think because there is some disagreement among the
Mhm.
texts about which ones are which. There's a
Mhm.
couple, I think the High Priestess path in particular is one that gets like, I can't remember which one it gets flipped with, but I think I ultimately fell down on the side of I'm going to go with what Christopher Penczak says in the Temple of High Witchcraft because he is a source I deeply trust on this issue.
Mhm.
So that is what I decided to go with and what I found my experience to be with those paths. It rang true for my own personal experience.
Delightful. So the star card has been coming up a lot, not just for me, but in other groups and for other people. Which pathway is the star card on? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I
Otherwise,
think
I
it's
will
in
resource the book.
it's in the introduction. It's not one I am 100% sure on off the top of my
Mhm.
head, I confess. If I had my poster, I had that on there. If I had my poster behind me, I could tell you.
Well,
I
this is
want to
why they
say,
have books and resources and
yeah,
things that we can go to, so we
exactly.
don't have to hold it all in our brains.
Exactly. And that's actually one of the other reasons I wrote this book is I found a lot of the other Kabbalah, in fact, pretty much all of the other books on Kabbalah that I read were very heavy on charts and tables and memorization of all the different correspondences of all the different things. And I
Mhm.
don't think you need to, number one, I think that's a bad way to start learning anything is by throwing a catalog of information about each thing at you.
Mhm.
I think it's important, but it's not the first thing you should learn. If you're trying to, I want you to have more of an experience with it first.
Mhm.
And over time, you probably will end up memorizing that stuff, the stuff that's important to you,
Yep.
but it's not a thing that like you have to know in order to understand this in some fashion. So I was
Mhm.
frustrated with other books that were very chart and table heavy. I was frustrated with other books that overcomplicated explaining how stuff worked when I'm like, "Oh, it's like this. Okay." And I in my day job, I explain difficult technical things to non-technical audiences a fair bit. So that's sort of my that's a talent I have, and so I wanted to apply it here.
Mhm. Well, one of the other reasons why I agree with you is when people are just learning things from books, is they're learning things from another person's perspective. It's then an additional step to learn it from your perspective and from
Hmm.
your lived experience, because
Yes.
your live, even though you and I have a lot of similar lived experiences, we also have a lot of different lived
Hmm.
experiences. And that is true for everyone on this beautiful earth, our
Hmm.
only home. Like, there are so many similarities and so many differences. And if we only learn things through another person's perspective, then it's actually a little more work to come to our own perspective. And we then also have the question of, well, what biases
Mhm.
is the author projecting out there? What was the social context and
Mhm.
the economic context of, especially when we're looking back at our more ancient texts, like it's important to take the whole worldview into account. Who got to speak, who got to be published, who was silenced, why, and it's so much where when we are coming from things from our own personal perspectives, we can anchor into our true lived experience and find those similarities and differences with others, but not doubt ourselves, not gaslight
Mhm.
ourselves.
Yeah. I think it's always beneficial to learn from others who have experienced something more than yourself, but exactly like you say, then incorporate it and adapt it and understand it through your own lens. One of the things you haven't gotten to yet in the book toward the end is there is a recommended exercise to create your own tree of life and to take something you are really passionate about and map it to the spheres and see how much that deepens and enriches your understanding of it. For me, I made a Steven Universe a tree of life, and because I was super super into that show at the time, and I just kept thinking of like, oh, this is this and this is this and this and this, so I actually commissioned an artist to draw it, and I had it printed, and I have a big thing of it on my wall over there. And I love it so much. And to me, that is like one of the biggest ways you will teach yourself this tool is to figure out what of the things that are deeply embedded in your head map onto it, not the thousands of charts and tables of like plants and perfumes that other people have put in there, but like what about you? What's your experience and how does that map onto there and how can you relate your own life experience to that?
Yes, absolutely. And simultaneously, I found the chart that
Yay.
you
Okay,
were
good.
talking about, and Key also tossed in the chat the reminder that the star is a da, da, da. Why aren't you showing me what I want? Uh, the star, there we go. The star is a teacher for the strength card, which is the card for this current year, or justice, depending
Mm,
on which cycle, which system for
hmm.
tarot you particularly prescribe to. And the star is pathway 28 from Netzach
Yes,
to
that's right.
Yesod.
Yes.
Hmm. So I know more about Netzach than I do Yesod off the top of my head. But for me, with one of the things that always comes up with the star card is giving thanks to the physical world and giving thanks to the metaphysical world, because the first image that always comes to my mind is Pamela Coleman Smith's
Mhm.
illustration where we have a naked femme-bodied person, although you don't actually, the leg is intentionally like
Mhm.
at a 90-degree angle, so you don't see the genitals. And one of the things that I love about pixie illustrations is they're like the the ribbons around bodies and things
Mhm.
were done intentionally, purportedly, to have it be more gender inclusive. So like,
Mhm.
no, we don't actually know if this is a man or a
Yeah.
woman or something else
Mhm.
entirely. And And so the star, our naked individual there pouring water out into water and pouring water out into land, has always been this giving thanks for the literal things that you have left, I have left, we have left after the tower crumbles, thinking
Yes.
about what are the next intentional steps for rebuilding with that bright light, with that um, connecting constellations with others who are just being their naked, vulnerable, authentic selves.
Mhm.
How does that um, how does that talk to you about the pathway of Netzach to Yesod? Or is it something else entirely for you?
Oh, and well, what's interesting about the paths is they're bi-directional, right?
Mhm.
So you can be experiencing going either direction. There, you could be going from, and apologies for pronunciation differences. There are many different versions of pronouncing all of the different Hebrew. So I'm going with what I speak, but there are many different valid pronunciations. So going from Yesod to Netzach or going from Netzach to Yesod are two very different things. But
Mhm.
Yesod is the world of imagination and illusion, and it is our first stop out of this manifest experience. Like going up that 30-second path from Malkuth to Yesod is leaving our bodies and going up into the astral and feeling that death and rebirth gate between those two things. So Yesod is like everything is possible, and it's also the final editor before things get manifested, right? So then we look at Netzach, which is like super like pushing out energy. It's very sexual. It's very passionate.
Mhm.
It's very chthonic. It's earthy. It's like, I feel like the path working for it is like you're in a sweltering jungle, where it's just like this rainforest experience of the deep humidity, the sensuality of that, the smell of the leaves, the feel of the dirt. You're just very embodied in that experience. So what does it mean to go from this like big heart sexuality thing down into the land of imagination? With the
Mhm.
star is that pouring down of energy, is that pouring out of that cup into the river that becomes manifestation, right? So and if you're going the other
Love
way,
that.
you're going further from manifestation, but you're taking all these big ideas, all this imagination, all these different possibilities, and you're directing them in an energetic way. So again, you're pouring out the water, but kind of in a different way.
Mhm.
So I can see like that's one of the interesting things about interpretation with the paths is like, which direction am I going here? Am I going this way or this way? And there's nuance to that each time.
Mhm. And one of the things that I love about tarot is that the how gravity plays in those cards
Mhm.
is allowed to be different than how gravity plays in this world, plays in Mull.
Mhm.
And I remember when I was doing my first deep um, tarot tutorial with Matthew Ellenwood, one of the things he shared was about the temperance card
Oh,
or pathway Tiferet to Yesod. And
that's my
that's
Sagittarius path. That is my
that
Sagittarius path. And I
I
always think
love it.
Sagittarians aren't known for temperance, but that card is meant to be a teacher. Like, yeah, you could use some.
And I loved learning, and it comes up so frequently when temperance comes up in readings that I give, that the water that is being poured from one vessel into the other is not following gravity. The
Hmm.
water is actually going from the lower vessel up into the upper
Hmm.
vessel. And you know, when hearing things like that, as this is a channel for continued education as well, there could be and maybe should be some doubt of like, I don't know if I believe that. Like gravity flows downward. And so I did a visualization and a path working into my temperance card to see how the water was in these vessels. And I climbed my way up and I felt the water shifting from the bottom into the top
Mhm.
and what that was to like do that like reverse water slide. And also to feel what it to imagine what it's like to be the salmon swimming upstream
Mhm.
if the
Or
path.
through the salmon cannon. Do you know about the salmon cannon?
I don't know about the
It's
salmon
it's
cannon, but I would love
literally like
to.
there's this dam that's like particularly hard for salmon to get through, so they literally have this thing that they shoot the salmon over
Oh,
the dam. If
I
you Google
have heard
salmon
about
cannon
that.
with safe search on, you will find you'll find video of it, and it's amazing. Yeah.
When you said canon, because we're talking about so many different canons, I was thinking of like a literary work, and I was like,
No,
oh no, what like
it's
who has?
literally like an actual physical cannon, and they fire the fish. It's almost as fun as the fish doorbell, which is like my other favorite fish thing, where the
I
fish can like the fish can basically ring a doorbell to move through one section to the other that they're trying to keep predators out of. And you have to, it's a website where you can watch live stream when fish ring the doorbell and you can push the button to let them through.
Oh my gosh, I love that. We
I love it.
in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of there's a name, there's a name for it, but like on the sides of all of our of many of our dams are all of the pass-throughs
Hmm.
for
For the
the
fish.
salmon and the lamprey um ladders. They're called
Yes.
ladders. We have lots of ladders. And we have another things from the chat that going back to Steven Universe, and there is a great excitement about wanting to see a Steven Universe Tree of Life.
You can find it on my blog. There, it's up on majorqueerna.com. But with all this fish talk, I have to tell you my very favorite tarot card, Page of Cups. You know, the
I
little fishy in the cup.
little fishy in the cup. When you were learning tarot, especially as a queer person, as another queer person, I was thankfully taught like my deep dive into tarot also by another queer person. And one of the things that I that was shared to me early on with the Page of Cups was that this card frequently comes up in people who are exploring their sexuality, exploring, we didn't have the term gender identity
Right.
then, but if we had had that term, it would have been that. And I have absolutely found that the Page of Cups has come up when people are thinking of coming out of the closet, either because of their sexuality or transgender, and that has definitely been true for me and my community. Is that something that you have ever seen in yours, or is that something that is maybe just specific to my teacher and I in our small group?
So I mainly read for myself. I'm not a professional reader of any capacity, and I've only done a few readings for others by request. So
Mhm.
the people I've done readings for have not actually been going through that, so it is not something I can say. But I think it does explain a lot of my attraction to that card. As like it was almost instant. Like the first time I saw it, I'm like, that's my person. Like that's my card. That's the one. I have a beta fish tattoo on my shoulder, partly because of that, and it's blue and it kind of like matches. I'm like, that is so much of what I vibe with this card so much, and I think that's part of why.
I love
And
that.
I think one of the keywords I learned for it when I was first studying, when I was I'm looking over at my bookshelf, Rachel Pollack's book 78 Degrees of Wisdom is like
Mm.
someone amused by their imagination, and I'm like, yep, that's me
Yeah.
very much.
So we
And
have,
speaking of tarot too, have you ever read Isabel Ratto Kleigman's Tarot and the Tree of Life? I think it's called.
I have
Um,
not. No, my
Highly recommended.
I very much came to my study in tarot both through personal study, through intensive study with Matthew Ellenwood, and
Mhm.
then learning by doing.
Mhm.
I'm very much a kinesthetic learner. And so I actually only started reading tarot books recently, and largely because I was starting to be a part of the professional tarot community,
Mhm.
and a lot of the people that I was meeting were also authors, and I was friends with them, and so I am very much an artists support artists and
Mhm.
friends support friends and queers support queers sort of person. So I'm like, well, I of course want to read your book and your book and your book and your
Yeah.
book because I know you. And so yeah, so my I have heard about that book, and I will definitely add it to the list, especially as Rebels and Priestesses grow, because I have a feeling, just knowing the four of us, that there will be even more Kabbalah tarot ness in
Yeah.
there. And we have another question from Shireen in the chat.
Hi,
What
Shireen.
if, hello, all of the rebels and priestesses are here. Y'all rock. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for reading
Um,
my book.
what, if anything, do you think is missing from conversations about the Kabbalah? And ideally, what would you like the evolution of this work to be?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts on this. Let me see if I can condense them down. Again, like my brain starts going, I'm like, nope, that's a 3 hour lecture. Simmer it down. Boil that down to its essence. Uh, so I'll start with the second part. What do I want the evolution to be? I would like there to be more books and articles and things on this subject. I know I'm not the only one teaching it. I'm not the first to teach it, first to write a book about it that got published. But I know other people have been doing this work. I couldn't find much of it when I was doing my research, but I want those voices to be elevated. I want more voices in on this, especially more voices from people from different marginalized communities that can speak to their experience with this. I'd love to just see more people talking about this, publishing stuff about it, teaching about it all over. That's my dream. And I think I say that in the conclusion of the book. Like, I'm hoping this is not the final word on the subject. Please, like, add your 2 cents. And what was the first part of the question again?
What do you think is missing from
What do I think is
conversations
missing?
about Kabbalah?
I mean, a lot of it is the queerness, which is why I wrote the book. Honestly, like that's the part I never heard about and was shocked over time that I was not hearing about. I'm like, there's so much to say here. Why isn't anyone saying it? Why isn't anyone pointing this out when they're teaching it in the classes that I'm taking? And granted, I have a very small sample size. I've not taken every Kabbalah class ever taught by any stretch of the means, but I've read a lot of books on it, and it was just kind of missing from a lot of that. So I'm glad to add that to the conversation, and I'm hoping that that will influence future works and be in some way referenced, even if the book itself is not specifically on the queerness of it. But if there's more Kabbalah books coming, I'm hoping that this will be in some way influential. So I think that's missing from it. I think the other thing that's missing from the conversation is something you mentioned earlier in the conversation, which is that we have to take into account the society and perspective of people who have written about and taught this before, and that a lot of the books that are have an incredible amount of good things to say also have a lot of really terrible things to say. And I really don't like to speak ill of other authors, but I think it's going to be okay because these are dead. Um, Dion Fortune was brilliant and also racist and ableist and sexist and classist and many other is, and came from a culture that encouraged that. And we have to, and it's easy to read those books and start like, I wanted to throw it against the wall so many times. I wanted to throw that book across the room and be like, what on earth are you talking? Like, no, this is terrible. Don't say that. Why are you saying that? You're saying so many brilliant things. Why did you have to throw that in there? So
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a really strong wheat to chaff sorting mechanism in your brain. And I recommend, and I, you know, I love libraries deeply. I was not raised by a librarian, but practically raised in a library. From the books that I own, I write in the margins and I write swear words in the margins when those things come up. And then I move on. I have to get it out of my system somehow. And
Hmm.
I think, there's it is important to recognize the culture and the context that these books were written, but not to forgive them for it, but also not
Yeah.
throw out the whole book necessarily. Because even the worst of the offenders, you can still learn something from. And sometimes in these older books, like Gareth Knight's, what is it? I keep looking over it. Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism, has some horrible shit in it, but then has the most delicious rant against Crowley that is not like apropos of nothing. He just goes off and it's really funny. So sometimes there's little hidden gems in them, but I found that every book I've read on this subject, even if I didn't have a lot of takeaways from them, they always taught me something.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot that we can take away. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you got to be conscious of, the bathwater, the dirt that's in the bathwater and the things that you don't want to carry forward in your own internal lexicon.
Well, talking about what we want to carry forward, that is an excellent segue because our hour is almost up. Obviously, we could talk about this a lot more
Oh
because
yeah.
we didn't even get into language choices, which was one of the tangents that I was going to lead us on. But I want to make sure that you have time to plug where you're gonna be next. If folk want to dive into classes and learning from you more, what are you up to next?
So I've just kind of finished my busy conference season, but I am going to be in the UK at the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, both in person and also I have an online contribution. So if you are not able to get to the UK, they have a lovely online conference, and I do have a class there on queer rites of passage that people can check out. And for the in-person event, I am doing a workshop on queering your magical practice. And this will be very, very interactive and conversational. It's one of my very favorite classes to teach. So that is the next place you will find me. I will probably be doing a lot more stuff next year because I have a new book coming out in January from Llewellyn that is called Queer Rights. And oh gosh, it's a long subtitle. And I'm like, wait, I had it in my brain. Okay, that's right. It's Queer Rights, a magical grimoire to honor your milestones with pride. Fun fact, authors don't pick their titles. We can influence them, but like I never remember the full title of Queer Qabala. I have a shortcut on my keyboard for it because it is so long. Um, but anyway, Queer Rites, a magical grimoire to honor your milestones with pride, which is a book of rituals for queer rites of passage.
Mm.
And I am super stoked for this book to come out. It is not yet up for pre-order, but it will be this month. So if you subscribe to my newsletter on majorarqueerna.com, you can be notified when it's. And I also have a book that came out in April, just last month. I co-authored Sagittarius Witch with Ivo Dominguez Jr. and several other amazing contributors. So check that out as part of the Witches Sun Sign series that Llewellyn published. There's one for every sun sign, and the last three are coming out this summer, which are Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. But all the rest are available now, and you can pick those up, and they're really great for learning astrology. They're great if you already know astrology, but you really want to dig into how to make the most of your sun sign as a magical practitioner. So definitely check those out. They're very practical. They're quick and easy reads. They're very cool little chunks of information in there. Some really nitty gritty astrology, some like, hey, this is my lived experience, is this. So
Mhm.
I think folks can go check that out as well.
Fantastic. And I will be putting all of those links uh down,
In the
down
doobly
there
doo. The
in the
doobly
little
doo.
in the doobly
Called
doo, in the little
that's
boxy thing.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, and I have a podcast called Four Quick Cues Book Talk with Enfys, and we're currently in the second season, and it's where I interview pagan authors and let a D20, a 20-sided dice, choose the questions. So it's fun, it's random, it's weird, and you can go check that out. And it is on YouTube, as well as Spotify and everywhere else you can get podcasts.
love it. All of those links will be below. It will take me longer than normal to put those links up because this is the last thing that I am doing for the month of May and until I go live again on June 10th because I am taking a sabbatical. My mother and I are road tripping and spreading my dad's ashes. So if you're like, why can't I book anything with Group Tarot right now? That's why. You are welcome to join my mailing list at grouptarot.com. Card of the week will still be going out for mailing list and for patrons. And if you want to support the work that I do on this channel, please consider becoming a patron. And otherwise, I will see many of you back here live on June 10th at 11 a.m. Pacific. And Enfys, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
Is there any last little tidbit that you would like to leave our listeners and watchers currently and future with?
I think I'll just leave with the thesis of my book, which is that Qabala is already queer and we can make it even more so.
Yes. Have a beautiful rest of your day, friends.
Thank you so much.